For decades, Trinidad and Tobago was one of the Caribbean's biggest economic success stories. Fueled by oil and natural gas exports, the country built modern infrastructure, funded social programs, and achieved one of the highest per capita incomes in the region. But beneath that success, a growing concern has emerged. Government debt has risen sharply over the past decade. Budget deficits have persisted. Businesses continue to complain about shortages of foreign exchange. And economists are increasingly asking whether Trinidad's finances are moving in the wrong direction. The country is not in a debt crisis today, but warning signs are flashing. This is the story of Trinidad and Tobago's growing debt challenge. To understand the issue, we first need to understand the country's economy. Unlike many Caribbean nations that depend heavily on tourism, Trinidad built its wealth on energy. Oil production began more than a century ago. Later, the country became a major exporter of natural gas, methanol, ammonia, and petrochemicals. For years, energy revenues generated billions of dollars for the government. That money funded roads, hospitals, schools, and public services. But there was one major risk. The economy became heavily dependent on a single sector. When energy prices were high, government revenues surged. When prices fell or production declined, public finances suffered. According to the International Monetary Fund's 2026 assessment of Trinidad and Tobago, the economy remains heavily dependent on the energy sector and exposed to external shocks. That vulnerability became increasingly visible over the last decade. Beginning in the mid-2000s, Trinidad faced several challenges at once. Global energy prices declined. Production from mature oil and gas fields weakened. Government revenues fell significantly, yet public spending remained high. Government still needed to fund infrastructure, public salaries, social programs, and essential services. As a result, borrowing became increasingly necessary. Year after year, debt levels climbed. Countries around the world borrow money to finance investments and manage economic cycles. The concern arises when debt continues rising faster than economic growth. That is where economists began raising alarms, not because Trinidad was facing immediate collapse, but because the long-term trend was becoming harder to ignore. Recent IMF estimates show that central government debt reached approximately 67.8% of GDP in fiscal year 2025. Broader public sector debt exceeded 84% of GDP. Those numbers alone do not mean the country is in crisis. The key question is whether the government can continue servicing that debt comfortably while maintaining economic growth. The IMF's executive board recently stated, "Fiscal consolidation remains essential to place public debt on a firmly declining path." In plain language, the IMF is saying that debt growth needs to slow. As debt rises, governments spend more money on interest payments. That means fewer resources available for healthcare, education, infrastructure, and economic development. The longer deficits continue, the more difficult those trade-offs become. At the same time, another issue continues to affect businesses across Trinidad and Tobago: foreign exchange shortages. For years, companies have reported difficulty obtaining enough US dollars to pay suppliers and conduct international transactions. The IMF noted, foreign exchange shortages continue to constrain economic activity. For importers and manufacturers, access to foreign currency is essential. Without it, purchasing equipment and inventory becomes more difficult. The shortage is closely tied to Trinidad's energy dependence. When fewer US dollars enter the economy through energy exports, foreign exchange becomes harder to obtain. Business groups have repeatedly argued that solving this problem is critical for economic growth. Without stronger private sector expansion, reducing reliance on government spending becomes much harder. Despite these concerns, most economists do not consider Trinidad and Tobago to be in a debt crisis. and there are important reasons why. First, the country still has access to international financial markets. Investors continue purchasing government bonds. Second, Trinidad possesses a major financial buffer through the Heritage and Stabilization Fund. The fund was created to save part of the country's energy wealth during prosperous years. Those savings can help cushion the economy during difficult periods. Most importantly, the IMF's debt sustainability analysis concluded, public debt remains sustainable. That is a crucial distinction. A debt crisis occurs when a government struggles to meet its financial obligations. There is currently no evidence that Trinidad and Tobago faces that situation. However, the IMF also issued a warning. The same report noted, debt is vulnerable to adverse shocks. In other words, today's situation is manageable, but it could become more difficult if major risks materialize. Government officials often point to future energy developments as part of the solution. New offshore gas projects are expected to boost production and generate additional revenues. Supporters believe these projects could strengthen government finances and improve foreign exchange availability. But there are uncertainties. Energy prices remain volatile, projects can face delays, and the global economy is gradually shifting toward cleaner energy sources. That is why many economists argue that Trinidad must diversify beyond oil and gas. The IMF has emphasized this point directly. Structural reforms and economic diversification are needed to boost long-term growth. Technology, manufacturing, financial services, logistics. These sectors may become increasingly important if Trinidad hopes to reduce its dependence on energy revenues. History offers an important lesson. Many countries that later faced serious debt crises did not appear to be in danger at first. Problems often develop slowly. Small deficits become larger ones. Borrowing accumulates year after year. Economic growth weakens. And eventually governments find themselves with fewer options. Trinidad and Tobago is not at that stage. But analysts say the country has an opportunity to address challenges before they become more severe. Today, Trinidad and Tobago remains financially stable. There is no sovereign default. There is no IMF bailout program. And the country still possesses substantial financial resources. But the warning signs are real. Debt has increased significantly. Budget deficits remain a concern. Foreign exchange shortages continue to affect businesses. And the economy remains heavily dependent on energy exports. As the IMF summarized in its latest assessment, building fiscal buffers and advancing structural reforms remain critical. Those words may define Trinidad's economic challenge over the coming years. Not whether the country faces a crisis today, but whether policymakers can act quickly enough to prevent one tomorrow. I'm Marlon Ross. Thank you for watching.